Okay, hello everyone, this is Jaren from Orbital Strike. Hello to all you Orbital Strikers listening in, or anyone else who might be watching this. This is my first video guide for the or for any class in Star Wars: The Old Republic, and today we're going to be looking at the Telekinetics Sage. This is a class that I have played since beta, but admittedly not really got into until probably a couple of months ago, maybe early this year. So this is the first of what I hope will be several guides to basically show how I play the class. I'm not going to pretend that this is the right way or the most efficient way, but it's the way I enjoy it. It's the way that seems to give the best results, and is something that I've tried and tested over a period of time. So what I'm going to do is, to start off with, I'm just going to talk you through my basic rotation. This is a pretty similar rotation in both PvE and PvP. Obviously in PvP you have to be a little bit more adaptable. If someone interrupts you, there are certain abilities you might not be able to use for a couple of moments, or if you're being focused you might have to run away, or even throw a couple of off-hills out there. But this is as close to what you can get to a rotation in PvP. So something I'll start off by saying is that you're going to want to tab dot. So for those of you who don't know what this means, you're going to want to apply your dot to as many people as possible. Typically it's done by just spamming the tab button and activating Weaken Mind, which is your sort of run-of-the-mill dot. And the reason you're going to want to do this is, well, it will become clear in a minute. So imagine running around tabbing. What you then want to do is a Mind Crush on a new target, followed immediately by a Weaken Mind. You should hopefully have this Psychic Projection, which causes your telekinetic throw to channel and tick twice as fast. This is a really useful proc that helps you to get some serious damage out there, and when you're tab dotting, you should be getting it. You should be getting it fairly often. And also it helps you to put some damage out there, put some pressure on the enemy healers. Around 3,000 damage over 18 seconds across several people. It's pretty considerable. Yes, it's number fluffing if all you care about is numbers, but it does help to get some damage out there. So we open with our Mind Crush, and then a Weaken Mind, followed immediately by Turbulence. And the reason we do it in this order is that a Turbulence that hits a target affected by your Weaken Mind will automatically crit. And when you're doing Turbulence, hopefully, if you're lucky, you will proc. Not lucky here. Not lucky at all here. Eventually, you will proc this. Got there in the end. It's usually, I tend to be quite lucky and get it first time, but eventually you'll proc Tidal Force, which makes this lovely ability here, which puts out a lot of damage to several targets, activate instantly, which is that's very useful because it actually has quite a long activation time otherwise. So again, hopefully a little bit lucky with our procs this time. Mind Crush, Weaken Mind, Turbulence, there it is. And straight into a Telekinetic Wave, at which point hopefully Telekinetic Throw should have procced. At this point, no disturbances until Turbulence is back up. Never do a Turbulence without a Weaken Mind up. should be able to time this so that you can go back to that opening rotation pretty well. So you can see here Weaken Mind is about to end, so we go back into Mind Crush, reapply Weaken Mind, Turbulence comes back up, and then if Telekinetic Throw doesn't drop, just pretty much slam Disturbance until Turbulence is back up. You can usually get 2 Turbulences off before you have to reapply your Weaken Mind. So you can see that you're putting out a fair bit of damage pretty consistently. The trick comes when you start to work in something like Force Potency and Mental Alacrity. These are both really useful for bursting down your opponents. This is the sort of thing you're going to want to utilise them quite heavily in ranked matches, for instance, where it's of vital importance to get the enemy healer down, or to... I've solo taken nodes with this because you can burst people down so quickly. Personally, I use the Stalker set, which the 4-piece bonus at least increases the force potency charges by 1, the default is 2, and reduces its cooldown by 15 seconds. This means you can use it faster, or use it more often, sorry, and make more use of it when that happens. So my rotation when I really want to kill someone would be to use Mental Alacrity, a Mind Crush, straight into a Weakened Mind, then Force Potency Turbulence, and if Telekinetic Throw hasn't procced, I'll just carry on into the Disturbances, and you get the idea. Usually you would be quite lucky because you would be tab dotting beforehand, so you would be able to go... There's a nice little bug here. Straight into a Telekinetic Throw, which would usually have a prop. And of course the great thing about Force Potency is that it applies to all 4 ticks of your Telekinetic Throw, which really helps to put out the damage quite quickly. So that is pretty much it for the rotation. I'll quickly go into the skill tree now. So Telekinetics tree is this middle tree here, if that's not obvious. Inner Strength on the bottom row reduces the force cost of force attacks and healing abilities, and increases your force accuracy. The force cost is really useful. In Telekinetics you will never be force starved, and as a result it's quite useful to occasionally put out some off hills. This gives you a couple more medals in war zones, it helps your team. Overall, very useful. Over here we have Upheaval. Now this gives, with only 2 points, this gives your project a 30% chance to project an additional chunk of debris at the target, which deals 50% of normal damage. Are we going to get lucky? I don't think we were there. Why do I have this? Well, to be honest, it's more useful than Mental Longevity. Like I said, in Telekinetics you will never be force starved. If you suspect you're going to have to off-heal a lot, then this might be more useful. However, putting this in project just gives you a slightly sweeter project, which I used to stay clear of a lot, but have found that I sometimes use it to help finish someone off when I just don't have time to put out a disturbance, or know that disturbance or turbulence is just going to be overkill for them. It also helps when you're kiting someone if you can just use an instant damaging ability. Concentration, this reduces the pushback suffered while activating some of your abilities, and increases your force regeneration rate. This is part of the reason why Telekinetics never runs out of force. Some damage increases here. Increasing the maximum range of your abilities. This is really useful against numerous classes. If you're against other ranged characters, then just getting a 5 meter bonus on them will be really useful. Also, it would help against, for example, Juggernauts or Marauders, who can leap at you from 30 meters away. So if you can start hitting them from 35, that's really useful. Telekinetic Wave, this is pretty self-explanatory. This is your AoE, one of your AoE abilities. Psychic Projection is what we talked about earlier, causing a telekinetic throw to channel and take twice as fast. Telekinetic Effusion, this is another of the reasons why you never run out of force, is because you quite often will have 75% off of your next 2 force attacks. It's really useful. You tend not to really notice it that much because it occurs often enough. Kinetic Collapse, this used to be a very overpowered ability prior to 2.0 because it affected any target that you put a force armor on. Now it just affects yourself. It's really useful when people are trying to swarm you. It's a great way to quickly run away, as long as you're careful about damaging those you've just stunned. Tidal Force. This is pretty much the most important proc you have to watch out for as telekinetics, other than Psychic Projection. So we saw earlier that when we activate Turbulence and also Disturbance, you have a chance to proc Tidal Force, which reduces the activation time of this. What a lot of people will notice is that Forcequake has a 20% chance to do this. What they often do not realise is that is that this occurs on a separate 10-second rate. So this is not going to as lucky as I was hoping it was going to. But what you can do is string together a telekinetic wave, 2 telekinetic waves, by getting the proc from Turbulence and then immediately after from Forcequake. This is most useful when you can get Forcequake on up to 5 enemies, because you get a much higher chance to proc it. Or rather, more chances to proc it, not a higher chance, sorry. So that is quite useful, that's worth keeping in mind. A lot of people stay clear of Forcequake because it has a very high force cost, with not a huge amount of damage, but that damage does stack up, and when you can combine it with Telekinetic Wave, it really is worth it, worth considering at least. So moving on, Cascading Force. This has a 100% chance to immobilize all affected targets of your telekinetic wave for half a second, and then slow them afterwards. If you keep in mind that you have this 5 meter bonus down here, that's a really great way of keeping people at bay. Telekinetic Momentum is when you activate Disturbance of Telekinetic Wave, there is a 30% chance the ability will produce a second attack that strikes the same target for 30% damage. If we leap up here, this does the same thing for Turbulence, as well as giving Mind Crush a 30% chance to do it twice. That's why Mind Crush is quite appealing for us. Jumping back down, every time these 2 abilities proc, it increases your force bonus damage. This stacks, and it stacks quite well, so you can pretty much always have this up in a sustained fight. And also these reduce the active cooldown for Mental Alacrity by 1 second, which is very nice, because the more you have Mental Alacrity, the faster you can put out that burst damage. This leads to flowing force, which makes telekinetic momentum. Note, not mental momentum. This only applies to your disturbance telekinetic wave. This makes it twice as likely to trigger when mental acuity is active. We've got some nice durations and cooldown changes there as well. A surge bonus to a disturbance, telekinetic wave, and turbulence. Remember, turbulence auto crits someone affected by your weakened mind, so that's a pretty nice damage booster. And then Force Wake, which has 100% chance to unbalance its targets and mobilise them for 5 seconds. Some people choose not to have this. I like it because I'm not too confident about my survivability. But some players will choose to put this somewhere else. They are generally more confident about being able to kite people and stay out of melee range. I tend to pug quite a lot, so this is quite useful to me when I don't have a tank that I can trust to keep people away from me. Force Haste, a couple of nice cooldown reductions, that's nice. And Turbulence, again, that's pretty self-explanatory. Why do I not take Blockout? This is very useful. Reduce activation time of Force Lift. When you have 2 points in there, it's by 0.6 seconds. Which is it's considerable. And increased lockout duration of Mind Snap. That's your main interrupt. Some people choose these, I just choose not to. I value some of the damage abilities higher. The same with Telekinetic Defense, which increases the amount absorbed by your force armor. I like this ability, however I choose to pick some of these other ones instead. And again, we've spoken about this, I just value upheaval a bit more. Here you have Empowered Throw in the balance tree. This increases your damage dealt by Project, which is made useful by upheaval. Telekinetic Throw and Weaken Mind. Sever Force is part of the balance tree, so we don't have to worry about that. I prefer this over the 2% damage reduction. Some people will choose Jedi Resistance instead. That's up to you. This is just how I prefer to do things. There is no right or wrong way. I always take main stat bonuses. In this case, it's increasing by 6%, which I find very valuable. I use willpower augments, so this this helps me quite a bit. I would highly recommend that you take this. And Critical Kinesis. This is just, I find it a very nice ability. Increases, or very nice trait, increases the critical chance of your telekinetic throw and disturbance by 6%. These are both key abilities in the telekinetics tree. Remember, telekinetic throw is affected over here by psychic projection, and you use disturbance a lot to proc. And finally, with your 3 points left over, you might want to put them back over here. I really like Focused Insight, which restores restores 1% of your total health when your periodic damage abilities crit. I like this, some people don't, but I would still rather have this flat 3% force critical chance bonus. So that's what I choose. And unfortunately, those are all the points I have. Otherwise, I would love to get a couple more abilities, but sadly not. So that is pretty much all I can think of to say about this tree. It is a really great tree in both PvE and PvP. It's a horrible habit of being awkward in PvE when you're CCing targets in close proximity to ones you're hitting, simply because of this telekinetic wave. You have to be very careful not to damage things you shouldn't. That's pretty much it. If you have any questions, then feel free to ask me. Otherwise, good luck playing Telekinetic Sage or your Lightning Sorcerer if you're feeling bad. And yes, thank you for watching. I welcome any tips on presenting or tips on how to play. Feel free to get in touch. Yeah, thanks, and have a Merry Christmas.
This isn't our first victory, and it won't be our last.